Good morning. How is everyone? Pretty good? All right. Sorry, I don't have a great illustration like that, but I think I'm definitely stealing that one. That's great. She has to teach me the magic trick later. I'm pretty sure I know it, but a magician never tells. So, if you're following along with us, we are in the story, and we find ourselves, just like Rhonda was saying, in David again, right? Last week, we kind of talked about David part 1, where he's like kind of the Doogie Howser. Anyone remember Doogie Howser? Anyone out there? Is it just me? So he was like this shepherd boy that became king, and everyone's like, wow. But now we're in phase 2 of David, where it's not so good, where David does some really messed up stuff. And I think a lot of us can kind of relate to maybe this David too. And so if you're following along, if you kind of glimpse into 2 Samuel 11, this is where David gazed upon Bathsheba. And I'm going to keep it PG. I know we got some kids out there. We won't even go PG-13. We'll just keep it PG. So in 2 Samuel 11, David gazes upon Bathsheba, and he says, I like that. And essentially, without getting into too much detail, he brings Uriah the Hittite, and he says, hey, go home. And he's like, no. So David has phase 2 of his plan. It goes like this. I'm going to arrange your death. Now, here's where it gets interesting. In 2 Samuel 23, now before I say this, when I was in middle school, I started reading my Bible because I was fascinated with David and his mighty men. I heard it in Sunday school once. And David and his mighty men were these guys, and so basically my source in all of this digging is middle school me. So bear with me. In 2 Samuel 23, Uriah is mentioned in these 30 guys. Now these 30 were known to be a match for even 100, and they were David's best friends, his leaders, and his best fighters. And it was David's friends, so now it gets a little more awkward, and the drama rises a little more, because this is someone, not only someone he knew, but probably one of his best friends. Ever arrange the death of your friend? You're better than David. See, the drama doesn't stop there. Once again, in 2 Samuel 11, we see this guy named Eliam. It's Bathsheba's father. Talk about an awkward Thanksgiving starting to fold out. See, Eliam is also mentioned in these 30 men, so it would have been someone that David knew and his friend. And so he arranges the death of his son-in-law. Does not stop there. See, I like to think David, if 2,000 years ago they had Walmart checkout lanes, the scroll of David with his face would have been like all over the tabloids. David has drama. And it goes on. If you look in 1 Chronicles 27:33, you hear this guy named Ahithophel. Everyone say that one. Go home and name your kid that, Ahithophel. And this guy, Ahithophel, in 1 Chronicles, it tells us he was David's main counselor. Anytime David needed advice, he would go to this guy. It says he was even above the priests. And this guy, do you know who he is? Bathsheba's grandpa. Oh, and it unfolds. And later we find this guy named Absalom. It's David's son who tries to kill David. Do you know who is giving Absalom advice? Ahithophel says, take 12,000 men and pursue David. You know why? They are like lions. If you go after them with anything less, you will be destroyed. So, David's life, ready for this? It's messed up. And I think some of us can relate a little. But here is where we're going to get to, and then we're going to talk about this thing called Workcamp. David's story is so messed up that it's in the character of God to redeem it. See, all of our stories eventually will tell tales of chaos and calamity. It's what makes the stories of restoration, redemption, and resurrection more powerful. See, the story of Jesus is God entering our chaos in order to redeem it, restore it, and resurrect our broken stories. It's my story. I wasn't always going to church and hanging out trying to disciple kids. But God redeemed me. See, as Christians, when we enter other people's chaos and calamities, just like Jesus' story, it becomes powerful, right? When we enter people's broken messes, and a few weeks ago, 26 of us ventured off into this. We had this crazy idea to go to a desert. And the temperatures were there was one day where it was 88, and Bree's going to tell us about that in the video, but it was 105, and we're on roofs, and it was miserable, but it was beautiful. See, these kids raised money to go to a desert and serve people and wake up at 5:30 a.m., and I will say they did it without complaining once. Why? This generation wants to serve. And they'll go anywhere and do anything, and nothing's going to stop them to serve God's people. But I want you to hear it from them, so check this video out.
The reason I went to Workcamp was kind of just for the experience.
I decided to go on this Workcamp to develop some new relationships and get closer to God.
And it's just fun. It's fun to hang out with a bunch of other kids that are going and willing to help other people.
Well, so at first I didn't really want to go to Workcamp. So Lilo, he was like, come on, please, please go, please, please. And so then I finally went.
Before we got there, the roof was falling apart, the shingles were completely falling off, and the paint was not existent. It was completely shattered. It was just gone.
When we went up on the roof, the roof was like falling apart. Like the shingles were like coming off, and like it was really worn down.
And we were up on this roof, and it wasn't that high, but it was high enough where your feet would be really hot and you'd be sliding around on this roof because it's steep. And we had to do some cutting with some metal. It was pretty hard stuff.
So on Monday we met Virgil and his older sister, and he invited us into his house, and he was really generous, and he gave us a granola bar and a bottle of water. And I thought that was really cool because he has electricity and running water, but he has to walk like a half a mile to go to the bathroom. He told us everything we were gonna do. He had us paint his trim and the base of his house.
A lot of the work that we did was painting and roofing and building a wall and tearing down a wall and tearing apart a deck, but at the end of the day, it wasn't about the work that we did, it was about the people that we helped.
Wednesday night there was a really cool moment. They did a big exercise where they had the person that was sitting next to you, and you pray over the person sitting next to you, and they pray over you, and it's just like off the cuff. Pray for 30 seconds about what you're going to pray for. And it's a really cool experience how you can have things on your heart that you don't even know are there, and then someone prays over them and you feel as if they're lifted off. And these are pretty common and just one of the like many really cool God moments that you can find at Workcamp.
On Friday, it was like 88 degrees and windy and cool, and it wasn't hot at all. It was so nice, and all the other days were just so hot. I mean, it was like 106, 102, 104 all week long.
My resident, which I worked on his house, his name was Virgil Sleepy. Great Navajo name. It was cool because at the end of the camp on Friday, he prayed for us and he blessed a bottle of water for us all to drink, and they prayed for us again in Navajo. And it was just a great experience that I'll remember for the rest of my life.
One extraordinary event that happened this week that we were at Workcamp is one of the crews accidentally ran over one of the dogs, and on their way back we passed them and they told us that they're going to look for a vet. And so our crew manager, his name was Greg, he was behind us, but he happened to be a veterinarian, and so he could help fix up the dog, and that was a huge God sighting because there's no one around, and the nearest vet would be in Colorado and we were in Utah, so it would be 2 hours away.
What really stuck out to me was how different lives can be. For instance, how here back in Colorado where we live, we have running water, electricity, practically everything we need to survive. And out there, they barely have running water, electricity, and they're still happy as can be and still living perfectly. So it was real eye-opening to me how easy their lives can be, even with how little they have.
Well, I think the biggest thing that I brought back from this is just not like not judging a book by its cover, because a lot of these houses look super decrepit, and you might think like, oh, who are the people that are living in this? They might not be the nicest or the best people, but then they end up being these incredible, awesome people that you end up making friends with, and they're just really in need of help. So
a way that it really impacted my faith was to learn that God works in mysterious ways, and He's a good Father, but it's not all the time that you get to see people that live in terrible conditions and in poverty, and they still go to worship, and they still feel that love from God. They're not dying spiritually, and they're not left empty from God, or they don't feel like they've been left empty from God.
Coming in, my faith was pretty good, but during this trip, the biggest thing that changed was that I realized how much hope God gives everybody, just because the people there had so little, but the thing that brought them through was that God was always there, and He provided for them. So I just realized how much hope God gives us when we don't have anything else. God's still there, and He can just provide for us and help us through each day.
Being extraordinary was a huge part of this work camp, and it really changed my life, because now that I come back, it makes me want to stick out and not be like everyone, and be the different person that does the right thing.
The biggest way that I grew was with everyone else. I feel like we all grow together.
So at the beginning of the trip, I had my doubts about God, and then I learned that hard work and determination and more repetition of reading my Bible and praying will just renew my faith, and it really has. Towards the end of the trip, I started praying more and reading my Bible a little bit more, and that's just carried on into the summer and to now.
To be outgoing, to find grace through Jesus, and to just go the extra mile for Him.
Man, I love these students. I think sometimes they don't like me, but I love them. And see, if you would ask me 7 years ago if I was going to be doing student ministry or even involved in the church, I probably would have been like, no, you're crazy. But you know why I joined? I heard this stat, and it haunts me. I heard that 80% of these guys are going to walk away by the time they're 18 and they graduate high school. 80%. Now, when I heard that, I had two options. It's a stat, or I could jump in. So I jumped in, and I found students are incredible. They have passions, they challenge me, they sharpen me. Now I'm going to tie this to the David story, then I'm going to challenge us. I like challenging. See, all of us can relate to David's story with Uriah, right? We're sinners. But the challenge is, are we going to relate to David and Solomon's story? The legacy we leave. See, in David's story, his sin of lust, adultery, murder of Uriah, and probably all the other things he did, it had a face, it had a name. Its name was Solomon. So every day, I'm sure David, every time he looked at Solomon, was probably reminded of the thing he did to get Solomon. He had to murder one of his best friends. And so David probably could have sat there and said, woe is me forever. And just sat there and looked at Solomon and I can't even look at you. But David chose redemption. He chose to look at Solomon and say he's still beautiful. God has redeemed. There is a redemption story here. See, in 1 Chronicles 22:5, it says this. David said, my son Solomon is young and inexperienced, and the house to be built for the Lord should be of great magnificence, and fame and splendor in the sight of all the nations. Therefore, I will make preparations for it. So David made an extensive preparation before his death. Then he called for his son Solomon and charged him to build a house for the Lord, the God of Israel. See, David spent the last year of his life preparing to hand everything to Solomon. See, the greatest legacy that David left wasn't his mighty men. It wasn't that he defeated Goliath. It wasn't the lion or any of these things. It was Solomon. the one that came after him. See, the beauty of the gospel is we get the opportunity to leave a legacy in one another. See, for 2,000 years, that's how we got here. And I'm sure statistics, if they would have kept him back there, were probably somewhere around there. But for me, maybe it's like David and Solomon. They have names, they have faces. I refuse to see one walk. But here's the kicker. I'm going to be honest right now. I hope that video left you with more questions than it did answers. You know why? Exactly where we want you. See, I want you to listen to these students, and I want these students to listen to you. See, Christianity has always been a conversation. It's the only way that Jew and Gentile, Roman and Jew, rich and poor, slave and master could ever coexist. These guys need your wisdom. And I'll be honest, they have wisdom for you too. See, my job in student ministry is to create disciples of Jesus. That's it. Fun and all that stuff is a secondary objective. See, luckily for me, we are Lutherans. I mean, the more I read about Martin Luther, the more I realize I love this guy. You know why? He's crazy. He was insane. The guy was on the cutting edge. His words challenged everybody. His ideas were radical. His desire to see both the elite and the commoner have the same faith was unique. And we as Lutherans, the guy rewrote history. And in student ministry, I'm ready to rewrite history again. Because I think there's a misconception that I am supposed to disciple all of them. If you leave it to me, I will fail. Jesus had 12, and he had time for 3. Peter, James, John. And they came out all right. I can't count how many students I run into. So, here is my challenge. Like I said, I hope that video left you with questions. And I want you to think about it. I want you to hear that dog story. It's incredible. They ran over a dog, they patched it up. But don't hear it from me, hear it from them. Hear how their hearts were changed and moved. So here's what I'm going to challenge you to do. And the first service was pretty good at this. I don't want any of these students to walk out of here without an invitation that you offer them and their parents for coffee or ice cream to hear these stories. Because that's a soundbite. They are more than sound bites. They are my friends. I think in conversations, your life will be changed like mine has. Listen to these guys. And their life will be changed by listening to you. It's called church. Iron sharpens iron. But sometimes there's friction. Sometimes they don't like me. They'll get over it. Or they won't. But like I said, statistically speaking, 80% of our young generation is walking away. And just like David looked at Solomon and said, I choose to see the beauty. I choose to see the beauty in them. And I hope you do too. Learn their names. Hear their stories. Many of them are going through things you can't imagine that someone could go through at a young age. I'm going to pray. Jesus, we love you. Thank you for all that was accomplished on that cross. So people like David could be known as not sinners and wretches, but a man after your own heart. That a guy like Matt Fullman could be redeemed and restored. Now I get to hang out with these amazing students. God, convict us, challenge us, and comfort us. Whatever we may be going through, we're all in different seasons of life today. God, use us. Strengthen the church. In Jesus' name, amen.